My dear friends, it is a privilege and an honor for me to introduce the man whose work has helped transform the lives of countless individuals, including celebrities like Sting and Robert Downey Jr., with over 50,000 consultations. You heard that right, 50,000 consultations, over 16 books, and countless hours of video instruction. Popular astrologer Rob Brezhny calls Stephen Forrest the most brilliant astrologer alive. And Jungian analyst Robert A. Johnson, after his natal reading, said it was one of the greatest events of his life. I couldn't agree more. It is my honor, my privilege to introduce my mentor and the living legend, Stephen Forrest. Welcome, Stephen. Hello.
Thank you. Thank you. And I really want to meet that guy you were just describing.
Oh my gosh. How did this whole thing start, Steve? I know I've heard the stories of you looking through the telescope and having this sense of wonder with the sky, but how
Yeah.
did evolutionary astrology germinate in you? How did that wonder transform into evolutionary astrology?
Yeah. Very simply, I, I observed that most astrology books would delineate a personality. That was the word they used to use, like delineate, like draw lines around a personality from which you could not escape, you know. So being a little silly, you're a Gemini, so you talk too much, you're a Scorpio, so you're really sexy, but nobody should trust you, and those kinds of profiles. And so much of astrology, even when it was more when the language was more sophisticated, still had that fundamentally descriptive quality, which implied a kind of stasis in life that wasn't true, that wasn't there. The simple observation that people were changing, and then I took it a step further, and so you pick your sign of the zodiac and read about it. All the Aquarians are cold, dissociated, and detached. No, all the Aquarians are geniuses who will change the world, with their innovativeness and uh, and so I began to recognize that not only did we have dark and light interpretations of the signs, but my observation that some people seem to be moving from the dark or more soul cage kind of dimension of their sign into higher ground. And I began to completely change my understanding of how the signs work, that instead of descriptions, they became evolutionary pathways. And that's evolutionary astrology.
Wow. They became, and you are also a Buddhist. Am I correct about that, Steve?
Yeah, I have taken formal refuge as a Buddhist, I guess about 15 years ago. And by some schools of Buddhism, as soon as you start thinking of yourself as one, you are one. And by that standard, it goes back to when I was about 20 and studying religion in college. I grew up in a Christian framework, and I can't say I've rejected Christianity. That doesn't feel right. But Buddhism, as an intellectual system, made more sense to me than any other religion.
And so, how did your understanding that these are evolutionary pathways and your call to Buddhism kind of bring about what was the evolution of even that process for you from the 20s when you discovered Buddhism and started studying it to and then the evolutionary pathways and then to where you are now?
Yeah, good question. I think a really critical link in the chain. I was probably 12 years old, give or take a year, and on my parents' bookshelf in our apartment in New York, I found a book about the sleeping prophet Edgar Cayce, a psychic, from 30s and 40s, and it's called "There Is a River" was the title of the book. Thomas Sugro, the author, and Edgar Cayce, very much a Kentucky Christian conventional kind of person with psychic powers, would go to sleep or something like sleep, enter a trance and say things he didn't remember later. And one time he was told that he had been babbling about somebody's past lives, which was completely outside of his culture. And much to his shock, there it was. And so reading that book at a fairly tender age introduced me to the idea of reincarnation. And obviously that plays a pivotal role in evolutionary astrology and a pivotal role in Buddhism too. So that's where the worm got into the apple as far as me being a normal American of the period.
Oh, wow. So I'm seeing how all the different strings have come in, like all the different influences. And, you just said something about the trance state and then receiving information. And you've talked so many times in the classes I've been in around the idea of transmission and receiving information in a way that's different than just words on a page or dialogue necessarily even. Can you talk a little bit more about transmission and darshan and all those things that are somewhat Eastern concepts, but that you embody them and use them so practically in your work?
Yeah, yeah, they're absolutely central. It's each civilization, of course, has, some threads that are right and they've lost other threads. And our Western civilization, we've lost this idea of transmission, at least officially. And what it means, it's like, well, here's the simplest way to start. It's like everybody's got an instinct for it. So let's imagine you have a chance to meet your favorite movie star, whoever that happens to be. And for almost any of us, it's like there's this level of excitement that's at one level understandable, but the intensity of that excitement is a little hard to explain. It feels right. We can't make it go away, but it's like if I am in the presence of, pick your movie star, pick your rock star, whatever, I'm going to get some of that juice. And it's like part of us knows these are just human beings. We shouldn't be that excited. But wait a minute, it's Sting, it's Gwyneth Paltrow, it's whoever we're into, and it's like even though we tend to be dismissive of that, there is this magical core of the idea that human beings are like tuning forks, and we radiate, we vibrate, and as I step into your presence, my tuning fork begins to pick up some of your vibration, and depending on whose vibrations we're picking up, it can be a really exciting, positive experience, and so I met the Buddhist teacher Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, who passed from this world not too many years ago. I met him, he puts his forehead against my forehead and then big smile. And I swear I understood Buddhism more. I once shook hands, had 5 minutes and shook hands with Eric Clapton, the great English guitarist. And I carefully carried my hand home to see if I could play the guitar any better. And I think it worked. I mean, I'm aware it sounds crazy. It sounds like I forgot to study algebra, so I'll sleep with the textbook under the pillow and see if that helps. It has that ring to it, and the textbook isn't going to work, but a living human being, it will work. This is all the lost part, in my opinion, of the symbolism of the sixth house, which is usually described in modern astrology in fairly boring terms. Nobody's real excited about it. You don't go to a conference and get a workshop in the sixth house. Nobody shows up. It's like brushing your teeth and dealing with your responsibilities, and so it's not very interesting, but it's profoundly interesting. Polar with the mystical 12th house. And so here's where we receive transmissions and transmit ourselves. It's where we find our teachers. It's a most exciting concept to me.
Yeah. I always see you in my sixth house because I have Saturn there in Leo. A very, very well known astrologer is going to be my astrology teacher.
And I'm a Capricorn, and see that it's almost like all astrologers understand you're going to learn something about your friends from your seventh house, but you'll often, in very parallel fashion, learn about your teachers and those whom you will teach, who are receptive to your own teaching from the sixth house. It's classic there. As I say, I'm a Capricorn, Saturn rules Capricorn. There you go. I'm not a Leo, but like my generation, I have Pluto in Leo, but I have Scorpio rising, which makes Pluto the ruler of my chart. And then if we take Leo in plain language instead of using the technical term Leo, we just think of a kind of colorful, big, expressive. It resonates a lot with Jupiter energy. And I have Jupiter conjunct my sun, so I can kind of do that rock star thing. I can't help it. It fits your chart.
It really does. It does. Well, I guess maybe from your forehead to mine, maybe we can rub off some of that rock stars that I'll be an astrologer too also.
Yeah, and it will work. It will work. It already has worked because, not to embarrass you, but Magna, you're a rising star in the world of astrology. I see your name more and more, and I remember when you were just a girl.
Right at that first sex, death, and occult AP.
Was that your first one? Oh my God. Talk about being born as an adult. That's the most teaching I've ever done.
Yeah, it was well, it was one of my favorite classes, and I was hooked after that. The AP, being with everybody over 4 days and having meals and having those booklets and having so much time with you in the evenings. We did talent shows.
Yeah.
I, I just loved that. And I feel like
Me
that's
too.
what the attempt is to recreate some of that energy at Astro-Bash. I just
Mhm.
wanted to ask you what makes you want to come back to it? And I know it's happening in your hometown, but you're a
Yeah.
super
Oh,
busy man.
a big reason right there. Yeah, uh, I've been living on the road basically, for much of my life, and it's an exhausting, insane way to live, and I know people who've done a lot worse than me, but I was off somewhere in the world about every month, you know, trip after trip. It was exhausting me. And then the great blessing of COVID came along. I was already thinking of cutting back, and COVID, of course, killed everything. I started my online school so I could teach from home, which is more realistic at my age and just given my level of energy. And so Astro-Bash has the great advantage of being like a half a mile from my house. So I don't have to get anywhere near the PSA, and go through all those indignities. That alone, makes it irresistible. And then, kind of what you were getting at a few minutes ago, a chance to hug people, and connect eye to eye and laugh and just be human. That's the context in which transmission occurs.
Yeah. I'm really, really looking for. I mean, one of the biggest reasons I'm going to Astro Bash is your 4 hour Pluto in Aquarius workshop session presentation. I don't know which version of it you're planning on doing, but I'm really excited about that. Can you give us a sneak peek about what you're going to be talking
Yeah,
about?
sure. So to if I ask an astrologer, I play dumb and I say, what does Pluto mean? What does Jupiter mean? Just pick your planets, let's say in a transit. All astrologers will have an answer, of course, and hopefully it'll be useful, accurate answer. But the key is that even though we can say things about, pick your planet that are generalizably accurate, put a planet in a sign and it's a different beast than that same planet in a different sign. The sign gives the planet an agenda, like put a planet in Cancer, and it takes on an inward kind of self-healing quality. That's its primary interest. It wants to be safe. It wants to create an environment where it's safe enough to do inner work. That's a Cancer agenda, whether it's Venus or Mars or Pluto or whatever. Put that same planet in Sagittarius, and it wants to have an adventure, it wants to have some fun. It wants to experience things it's never experienced before, even though that can be kind of dangerous. Cancer is thinking, oh, I don't know about that. Go to Kazakhstan? Are you crazy? And Sagittarius, oh, Kazakhstan, I've never been there, and so it's so important. This is just elemental astrology to recognize that to understand a planet, you have to see it in the context of a sign and a house. That's the living quantum of astrological energy. So Pluto's been in Capricorn since 2008. It's not quite done yet. It's, the last gasp of, a few weeks coming up, and then on into Aquarius until 2044. And Pluto in Capricorn is a whole different creature than Pluto in Aquarius. And so essentially my workshop at Astro-Bash, I want to attempt to support astrologers in recognizing that some of the riffs they've been using very effectively since 2008 with their clients talking about Pluto and Capricorn are going to require an update, that we have a different set of energies. I could launch into the full workshop here, but that would probably be a mistake.
Well, we want everyone to come to Astro-Bash and hear it. And I am especially looking forward to that. And I really appreciate what you just said about the fact that you want to help astrologers recontextualize the Pluto's transit into Aquarius, because there's something about the generosity with which you have taught that I have just appreciated the heck out of my entire career, because it started with you. And you've told us that we can even steal your words exactly from your mouth and not even quote you, which I try to quote you every time anyway. But I'm really looking forward to some of the ways that you language things and the way you have mentored people. The level of generosity is just, I don't know, staggering. And what are you hoping to accomplish with the mentoring that you're doing? And why do you let us steal your words?
It's a legacy. It's so important to remember how old you are, or one is, And here I am in my middle 70s at this point. And the same thing all the old people have said to all the young people since the beginning of time. You have no idea how quickly life goes by, how short life is. But, as you get older and you got your eye on the exit, it naturally creates less attachment in you and more generosity. It's like, why hold on to something you can't hold on to? There's a kind of relief in divesting yourself of the things to which you're attached. And a younger person would have a very difficult time understanding that, not because they're dumber, but because they're at a different stage in the life cycle where it's appropriate to have more I, me, mine kind of stuff because you're building a life. And yet later, you start thinking of how you can make other people happy. And it sounds like this great virtue, but it actually arises kind of organically with the aging process. It's why grandparents are so enthusiastic and crazy about seeing their grandchildren. It's like they love the grandkids, but there's something exaggerating it, that urge to pass things on. I'd also, I'd add one more point. This is technical. There's a lore in astrology that I think is valid, that as a planet gets to the end of a sign, it's often described as in the last degree. Maybe you don't have to be quite that rigid about it, but near the end of a sign, it's filled with a sense that I need to release what I have built in this planet. I need to give it away because I'm preparing to enter something new. I've always found that plausible. And in my own case, my Mercury, my teaching, my words, Mercury in the third house, and we've got a really strong Mercury, and 29 degrees, 58 minutes of Capricorn. It's like right at the tail end. And so there's astrological correlate for me saying, hey, take my teaching, take my words, I don't need to be attached to them. So there's even a little technical piece.
So beautiful. Such a
Yeah.
beautiful teaching and living of the teaching itself.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned legacy, Steve. If
Mhm.
time, money, and energy were no bar, what would you like to do for astrology today? Where would you want to take it?
If I had infinite money, first, I feel so fortunate to say that suddenly I have $500 million. It wouldn't change my life very much, because I'm doing what I want to do. The idea that I should move to a finca in Costa Rica or something and waste away at Margaritaville, I can't say it has no appeal, but not enough that I would actually do it. I'm going to keep up with this work as long as I can. It's rewarding. But if, pushing it a little bit further, ever since I was little, my fundamental sense of mission with astrology is to transform it into this evolutionary framework, as we've talked about, but then to popularize it. So I'm not preaching to the astrological choir. I'm talking to the public. I don't want to impress other astrologers as much as I want to reach the wider world and offer the spiritual gift of astrology to hundreds and thousands, of people, if possible. I've had some success with that. Um, so if I had all that money, I think I would put it basically into an advertising campaign. I might not call it exactly that, but the way you can uh, use the media nowadays to reach people. So we have some dancing monkey on TikTok with 7 million followers. Wouldn't it be great if astrology could reach out to the world that way? We could give people a taste of what it can do for them. That's what I'd do with the money.
Yeah, well, that's a call to action for all of us to maybe help you do that
Yeah,
because
yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, and it's working. It's one of the beautiful observations that comes with me being in the world for so long now is just watching astrology star rise. It used to be like when I was young. You get a dirty look if you mention the word astrology. People would immediately assume you were thick. If you believed in it, and now people are interested and it's accepted, and we hear stars making casual references to their sun signs, or that kind of stuff, and it's great. We have succeeded in breaking through the wall of ignorance.
yeah, feels very Neptune and Pisces. So
Yeah.
similar to the spiritualism movement in the late 1940s.
Yes, yes, yes.
Sorry, 1840s. Wow.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep. Yeah.
This conversation reminds me of an email you and I had shared where you said, I do wish that everyone would turn into an evolutionary astrologer. I know that's silly and won't happen and maybe shouldn't happen. But if it did, astrology would explode into the mainstream and help save the world. I love that sentiment and your passion for it. Can you tell me more about? I didn't want to keep emailing and be like, "Well, tell me what that means, Steve." But I really want to know, what did you mean by that?
Yeah, happy to talk about it, and it's sort of a delicate subject. Um, Rob Hand was once asked, what's the best kind of astrology, or what's the best house system, or, some question like that. And he had the most wonderful answer. I always quote him, uh, which is truer, French or German? It's just the perfect response. And so I sincerely aspire to being respectful to all branches of astrology for that reason. And I've seen practitioners of Jyotish and Hellenism and the Renaissance styles and Uranian and all of these different branches. I've seen skillful practitioners help people and get results, even though the systems are in some tension with each other. So I say that sincerely. I also want to say it's kind of my official position, but I, I'd add I've never met I've never met an astrologer who practiced the second best form of astrology he or she had ever found, So you were young, we get overwhelmed, we get a taste of everything, and something speaks to us. And so I have to say, choice-centered evolutionary astrology is by far the most powerful system I've ever encountered. And it's delicate because I hold that intention with my sincere desire to be respectful of everybody else. But of course, I promote mine. And I know that nowadays, people are very concerned with their own personal empowerment. There's positive and negative sides to that, but the old notion of knowing your place and accepting your fate, and all of that is much less popular than it used to be. And so many forms of astrology unwittingly put people in their place. It's like, here's your personality, here's your fate. And evolutionary astrology embodies a much more inspiring truth, that you're creating your own future. You're capable of growth and evolution. You're not powerless in your own life. You're not powerless in the face of your complexes. You can do something about them. And that language works in the modern world. And I think it's one of the reasons that evolutionary astrology and its various clones and philosophies consistent with it have exploded, because the public appreciates the empowerment. And so for that reason, I go right back into the lines you were quoting from our email exchange, that if all astrologers, converted to being evolutionary astrologers using the Stephen Forrest method, I'm glad I'm laughing, but and obviously it's not going to happen. But if it did happen, I would be very surprised if there wasn't a massive increase in astrology's public acceptance. It's simply, I think it's the best form of astrology. I quickly own that. Everybody practices what they think is the best form. But I also think it's the form that is most marketable in the modern world. People want empowerment. And I think it's fair to say a large part of the population wants a sense of palpable spiritual meaning in their lives, that there's more going on here than trying to make money and lose weight and then dying, that the philosophical spiritual framework is medicine for this existentialist world.
Yeah, it makes me think of this idea that the losing weight and making money and all those things become secondary motivations. And what we're maybe hungry for is something that's more root oriented, something more core to our sense of being, this spiritual okayness with ourselves, and in my, go ahead.
Oh, I'm just
Yeah.
agreeing. We're born for a purpose, and
Yeah.
and we can sort of prove it with astrology. It's like, here's your chart, here's your life, see what's going on here, see what your soul is trying to learn. That the abstract idea that life is purposeful, God has a plan, fine. But what astrology does is it demonstrates that to each person individually, convincingly. And that's medicine.
Yeah. Well, Steve, if somehow someone in this prolific career of yours has not encountered you yet, what would you say is like the core of evolutionary astrology that has this ability to both empower and provide this deep sense of spiritual purpose at the same time?
Yeah, I can say it very simply. Most astrology says, here's who you are and here's what's going to happen to you. That that's the conventional approach. In evolutionary astrology, we reject that at the most fundamental level. We don't look at a birth chart like your nature and your fate. We look at the birth chart like a blueprint for the life you were born to live. It's an entirely different paradigm. Here's a path you're on. Here's not a box you're in, but a path you're on. And the more you follow this path, the happier you will be. We can just simply put it that way. And that happiness, we can take that beautiful word, nothing to be ashamed of, pursuing happiness. But beyond that, it's like that happiness derives from the fact that you were born with a purpose, and here's how it looks if you're fulfilling it. I always like to, in introducing this to a client for the first time, I'll say that, if you live this life that we're about to describe, you'll lie on your deathbed with a smile on your face, and there's no greater victory than that for anybody. Get to the end of the trail with the feeling that, I did it. I did what I came here to do. Nothing better than that in this world. And a chart tells you how to get there.
Yeah. I remember those words in my first reading with you, and how appropriate for a Scorpio rising to
Yeah,
be.
yeah, exactly. And that's Scorpio South Node, yeah. Dancing with Mr. D.
Yeah. Well, I think there's something, I think all spiritual traditions even talk about the memento mori, being aware of the fact that, whether you're 40 or 20 or 70, that that exists for every single one of us. And none of us knows when that last moment, when that last Saturnine contraction of exhalation is going to happen, and no more
Exactly.
Jupiter inhalation.
The asteroid could be heading for the Earth at this very
Yeah.
moment. But to remember it, death is the ultimate counselor. It's like what's important and what isn't. Everybody on their deathbed, we say, "What did you regret?" And they all say, "I didn't love enough," or "I didn't have enough faith in life. I didn't take the risks I needed to take. I didn't kiss everybody I was supposed to kiss." That's it's universal. It's almost a cliche, but I don't want to diminish it by calling it a cliche. It's the soul of wisdom, and it derives very directly from death.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been curious, there's something about, there's so many teachers in astrology, and I'm so grateful that I ran into you first. And because I don't think I would have turned to astrology had it not been for the philosophical foundation upon which evolutionary astrology is built. The why are we here and how do we navigate it now that we are here? And that there's more to it than just the parents we're born to. I mean, they're a huge part of it with the entire lineage, but still there's more to this being than. And so I'm just curious, you started in your 20s doing astrology. Now you're in your 70s. You've done over 50,000 readings. What was it like at the beginning? What is it like now? How has your understanding of humanity, after sitting with 50,000 people individually in the most intimate possible way, how has that informed your work and your own understanding of humanity?
Yeah, wow. Yeah, big question. First, it's just a tweak. When I think of when I started studying astrology in this lifetime, probably the most critical moment, I was just 13 years old, and I met a woman who taught me palmistry. and you have a like a plane of Venus and a plane of the moon and a plane of Jupiter. The on your hand, the intellectual construct of palmistry and the intellectual construct of astrology are really quite identical, same language. And so I really began studying that symbolism at age 13 and never let go. 50,000 readings, I think, is a pretty accurate figure. I've never counted, but once I got into astrology and when I was young, I was doing a lot of it. I was like 27 when I quit my job, my day job. I was already doing a lot of readings at night. I'm a Capricorn with Saturn and Virgo on the midheaven. So, I work hard and relentlessly. And, enough years, you rack up a lot of readings. So again, I haven't counted, but I think that's probably, considering all the charts I've commented on, I publicly or privately, 50,000 is probably pretty accurate. And what I've learned from that, to the heart of your question, I go back to, I've said this before, I'll point to it again, that people change, and yet their standard astrological descriptions don't change. And that's the problem. Evolutionary astrology corrects that tension between reality and conventional astrological practice.
People change. I remember that those are the first two words of The Inner Sky. Right.
Yes, exactly. Chapter one. Yeah.
And Inner Sky just turned 40 this year. It's having its Uranus opposition.
Yeah, close. They're moving into it for sure. And isn't that amazing? 40 years goes by so quickly. But yeah, Inner Sky, it came out in August 1984, official
Yeah.
pub date.
It's like you're a testament to following our passion. And it's like if you just and hard work. I mean, Saturn on the midheaven and the relentlessness of your work. If I know you're doing the thing you love doing now,
Yeah.
what are you most passionate about personally, astrologically, just in life right now?
Building the legacy, building the bridge to the wider public, that's really where my heart is, my motivation is. And so I'm working as hard as ever, still basically, I guess a 60-hour week would be fairly typical, but um, fewer readings, fewer personal readings. And what's taken up the slack are two things: my school, the Forrest Center for Evolutionary Astrology, and this cell phone app project called Leela that I've been working on for the last 6 years or so, with the National Football League great Ricky Williams. He and I are really close. It seems on the face of it the most unlikely friendship in the world. With him, this gigantic sports star, and me, obviously, a pot-bellied intellectual. So Ricky and I are different, but he's wonderful, and he and his wife Linnea came up with this idea. They were in a synastry class I taught early in their relationship, and their names came out of the hat, and I wound up spending a day talking about their relationship astrologically, and they found it helpful enough that they were thinking, wow, if this could be turned into a cell phone app, it could make a lot of money maybe, but also help a lot of people. And so they recruited me, and I guess I've written probably something like 3 books worth of material for it. It's really vast, and it's gaining traction. It's sort of a big subject. I don't want to yak too much about it, but we've avoided giving away our power to investors. We've wanted to stay totally in control of this, which has produced what I think is an absolutely terrific product. They talk about it. It's like having Stephen Forrest in your pocket is the marketing angle they've come up with. But of course, we are having a harder time deploying the product into the larger world. I think we'll succeed in that. But at any rate, that's all outreach, trying to build the bridge to people with like a slight open-mindedness, casual interest in astrology, kind of what the heck, let me look at this and and give them a taste of actual evolutionary astrology. So it's a really wide outreach to the general public in the form of Leela. And then my school, Forrest Center for Evolutionary Astrology, what we're doing there is training serious astrologers. It's like a 4-year program, and people finish and they're fully empowered to do this kind of astrological work for anybody who comes to them. So that's a more narrow, more sophisticated kind of higher end outreach. Um, I'm resistant to the idea that in the FCEA we're cloning Stephen Forrest, but I have to admit there's some of that, and learn these methods, not that method, not this one, but these methods that I have sort of developed. And once you've learned that, once you've mastered that, take it wherever you want, plenty of room for individuation. But first, we'll master the craft of evolutionary astrology, which in the school takes 3 or 4 years. It's a serious commitment. We've
Yeah.
had 250 people or something. It's big.
Wow. That sounds amazing. I miss the APs, so it's nice that there's something continuing. But there's
Yeah.
no, I mean, there's just feels like no substitute for just being together in person. And,
Yeah.
how do you reconcile the fact that you can't physically be with people in the same way that you used to be able to be, especially with the stuff we talked about with transmission and all of that? How are you working through that stuff in
Um,
terms of your legacy? Yeah.
yeah. Awkwardly, it is difficult. It's maybe difficult is too mild a word, maybe impossible. Um, so first, two things. One, when we started the school, online stuff, Zoom stuff, and uh, uh, I I was afraid it wouldn't work. I was afraid it would feel cold and impersonal. And I've been happily surprised at how much better it is than that. Uh, I feel connections, soul, heart connections with people who have actually just been little thumbnails on the screen I'm looking at now. And then when I finally meet them in person, which happens sometimes, they feel like old friends, even though we've never been in each other's presence before. So that's been a delight. But I also, I was thinking I had given up travel, and it, I haven't. I'm back to it. I'm as I mentioned, I think before we were recording, I'm just back from teaching a 5-day program at Omega Institute in upstate New York. We had like literally 100 people in the class. It was a big class, and I think something like 40 of them were FCEA students, who had come to, get the transmission, the personal direct stuff, the hugs, the getting to know each other. So that was great. Astro-Bash coming up at the end of September. So we have East Coast and West Coast of North America, for the students. I'm going back to China in October. We have a lot of Asian students in the school, and several of them are going to attend my programs in Beijing. And so I owe each one of them a hug and maybe a transmission. We have a lot of European students, and in late April, I'm going to do a 4-day class in Athens, Greece, to sort of service the European contingents and the Israeli and Turkish folks, who are in the school. So I seem to be back on the road again, much to my surprise. I miss the
Oh,
hugs.
we miss them too. So I'm really, really glad you are. Steve, I've got a few more questions. How are you doing on time? Okay,
I'm
great.
doing great. Yeah, this is fun.
Oh, I'm having a great time too. So, having sustained such a long and impactful career, What advice would you give to new astrologers, astrologers who've even graduated from your programs, from your schools, who are just starting out trying to build a career in astrology?
First, I'd suggest everybody should be born as a Capricorn. That's a good. That's fun to say, but not true. It's like, oh, all the signs can do it. But persistence really helps. If you want to build a successful career as a counseling astrologer, not writing for websites or magazines, or that's a different thing. But as a counseling astrologer, you can make living like more or less on the same plane as a successful psychotherapist. It's a good life, meaningful life, and middle class life as far as the practical side of things go. So the key to success there is word of mouth. People whom you've helped telling their friends that you helped them, and to get that snowball rolling, you need consistency, discipline, and sustained effort. It takes a while to reach that critical mass. Um, there's advice I used to give about this, and it's the world is changing. This is probably less valid now, but I used to say it really helps to find a town or city to live in and stay there. And there's that's not standard modern lifestyle. People move around a lot, but there's a lot to be said for personal contact, with people face to face, kind of transmission stuff in one place where, they tell their friends. I mean, if you're living in upstate New York, and somebody in Los Angeles hears about your work, gee, they would love to see you, but that's a long commute. But, in one town, you can build momentum, concentration, recognition. I think that's still worth saying, to pick a community and serve it. That's really the right attitude. Serve your community. But of course, nowadays, half our community is digital, and you can reach out to people and form community on the internet. It's it works, and some people have been very successful at it. There we go back to this theme of our whole conversation here of the mystery of transmission, the why are hugs important? Why is eye-to-eye contact important? People forget about that, but it is powerful, and you can harness it as a marketing tool. I hate to sound so cold about it, but that's, kind of what it is. And so having a face-to-face community, the snowball can get rolling, and pretty soon you've got like a therapist's practice.
Very, very helpful. Was it a trial and error process for you, or how did it work for you?
I blundered into it by dumb luck, and only later, realized what I had done. You know, I went to school in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, went to college there. So I arrived, I'm like 18 years old. And immediately, I'm kind of the kid in the dorm who would look at somebody's chart, and I stayed in the town. I loved the town. Nice college town, lots of culture, big part of the music scene there, and lots of friends. And so I just had no desire to leave. It kind of crossed my mind. Maybe I should, but I thought, no, I'm already happy where I am. And it was only later that I realized that I had sort of unwittingly, created this huge practice. In fact, I have to say that by the time I left Chapel Hill, in 2008, um, I mean, I still miss it, and it's still often the scene of my dreams, literally my dreams at night. Still very much in touch with a lot of friends there, but it was getting hard to go out to dinner. without people coming and sitting in my lap and, asking about their charts. It's a town of 50,000, and I'd done readings for I don't know how many thousands of the people who were there, and I could have run for mayor, and it was getting a little overwhelming sometimes. Fame is overrated. It can be kind of exhausting.
I can imagine. Well, I can imagine up here. Steve, I wanted to ask you a couple of just fun, playful questions.
Yeah, for sure.
You have an Aries moon. If
Yeah.
your Aries moon took over the world, what's the first thing it would do?
Vote for Kamala. And insist everybody else did too. That's pure Aries moon.
I love that. If
Yeah,
you
I
could
love
have,
it too, but I should say there's a bit of a soapbox. Um, I'm political. I will enthusiastically vote for Kamala. Donald Trump terrifies me. I'm an American citizen. I take responsibility for being an American citizen, taking position. But I hate it when astrologers get up in front of their audience and basically say, Jupiter wants you to vote for this candidate, because I mean, not that exactly, but astrology, if it's anything, it's a celebration of human diversity. You know, if we need everybody to be just like us and agree with us, we shouldn't be an astrologer. We should be a politician, I guess. But this this idea is so fundamental that as astrologers, the heart work of it, it's like if if a Trump supporter comes to sit with me for a reading, I aspire to treat that person seriously, lovingly, compassionately, to keep my heart open. Sometimes it's more of a struggle than other times, but it is the right aspiration, that diversity. That's what astrology is about.
beautifully said, indeed. It's my favorite thing I think that I've learned from astrology is that we are so unique and so diverse, and not just in what we look like and the gender that we're born into, or what we identify with, or any of that. Like,
Mhm.
individually, just that one slice of sky at that exact moment makes us so unique from each, and to be celebrated. I've loved that. Every time I think, okay, that's it with this sign, I meet somebody, like, as you would say, Steve, glows in the dark with that sign.
Right, exactly. And the absolute uniqueness of each moment. I, I love to say we're as different from each other as snowflakes are from each other, and as similar to each other as snowflakes. That's we're all built out of the same stuff. There's that common humanity, but all the different mixtures and variations that are effectively infinite variability.
Steve, I when you talk about this, it's like one of the things you said earlier about um, the different branches of astrology. I've studied with you, and I've also studied some other branches, and I sometimes find myself, when I do electional, I almost feel paralyzed in action, because it's like you can never get a perfect chart elected.
You're right.
So what advice would you give to people who, and I've worked through some of that. I'm like, I'm just going to do the thing that feels in the flow for me, and then trust that the chart is exactly the right chart for that act. What would you say to somebody who is struggling with some of the languaging and some of the bounds that astrology can put on us, both psychologically and, in terms of personality and all of that?
Yeah. That's a complex question. I think trust the universe, trust your intuition. The points you've made there really should be primary. Uh, and yet, electional astrology, choosing the optimal moment to take an action, is effective. It's a valid technique. Um, and so you can spin things in your favor, using the magic of astrology. Why not? It's like the weather report. It's going to rain today. Bring an umbrella. It's like good to know it's going to rain. And yet it's easy to recognize times when electional astrology seems to fail. And I guess what I would insert here is that astrology, in my opinion, never fails. But when it seems to fail, it's because our assumption is too rigid. All this sounds abstract, so let me make it real. Uh, there's a terrible chart for an event that technically at this event that I'm about to describe, the last aspect the moon was going to make before it left the sign it was in, before it became the void of course moon. Fundamental technique in electional astrology, follow the moon, most important thing. And the last aspect it was going to make was a square to Neptune. Oh, so there's going to be confusion, there's going to be trouble, maybe catastrophe. This is the chart for the launch of Apollo 11, that landed successfully on the moon. And so obviously incorrect, the astrologer would have said these guys are dead meat, and no, they're heroes, and they got back to Earth safely. But what happened, it's a wonderful story. They're landing this lunar module, Neil Armstrong, at the controls, and basically the onboard computer, I understand, is like an old Commodore 64, basically, one of it's a very primitive, slow computer, the best they had in 1969. And so they're landing and they have like 22 seconds of fuel, before they crash onto the Earth, and the computer freezes. You can imagine their consternation, and there's that chart. I mean, they came that close to disaster. And Neil Armstrong, heroic test pilot kind of guy, he just took over, violated all the rules, didn't let the computer do anything, and he landed that puppy by the seat of his pants, and I mean, it's a great story, but the moral of the story is never rule out consciousness, the power of human choice, our ability to not be passive in the face of astrological forces. He definitely faced a Neptunian situation, and he dealt with it. He rose to it. He allowed his higher self, there's Neptune, to take over, and he landed the module. The eagle has landed.
Wow.
And yeah, there's a lot of stories like that, where on the face of it, the very mechanical view of astrology, we would see astrology failing. Like those guys should have died. I'm really sad they didn't die, because then my theories would have been right. But consciousness interacts with the astrological forces and produces the reality we experience. It's not the planets that produce the reality we experience. It's the interaction of consciousness with the planets.
Wow. Consciousness interacts with the reality we produce, not the planets. I love that. That should be a bumper sticker for all astrologers. Steve, I have one more kind of fun question that I'm curious about. If you had a conversation with any historical, if you could have a conversation with any historical astrologer, who would it be and what would you talk about?
Well, without a doubt, Carl Gustav Jung. His interest in astrology is underreported, underestimated. He did write about it. There's no doubt about that. In my friendship with Robert A. Johnson, who studied directly with Jung, actually the year I was born, and he pointed out that Jung himself had said that he would never enter into analysis with a client without looking at their astrological chart. That's how serious Jung was about astrology. And for those of us who practice a kind of astrology that has a sort of 20th century psychological attitudes and perspectives rather than 19th century and previous kind of attitudes towards life. We all stand on the shoulders of Carl Jung. Like Liz Green's work, if you took Carl Jung out of it, she would have written a couple of comic books. And I don't mean to sound negative about Liz Green, but she's in that tradition, and it's a beautiful tradition. So Carl Jung, definitely. Let's have dinner, Carl.
Uh, well, I think a lot of us are going to be excited about having dinner with you very soon in September. What are
I
you
look
most
uh,
what are you most excited about being at Astro-Bash?
seeing people I love and care about, and that's really the heart of it. I still learn sometimes from other astrologers, and so maybe that'll happen. Maybe I'll learn something useful and fresh. But mostly it's receiving loving transmission, from people I care about, my tribe. That's the magic.
Yeah. Steve, it has been such a pleasure to talk to you and to spend time with you this afternoon. And I can't wait to do the in-person hugs and transmission.
Me too. I'm looking forward to it, Magna.
Thank you so much for making time today for our chat. And I'm just thrilled and delighted that we could share this time together.
Me too. Me too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.